What do the histories of Sumer, Assyria, Phoenicia, and ancient Egypt have to do with Western civilization? A long time after graduating from high school, this question popped into my head. As the cradle of civilization, why were these histories included in one of my classes back then? History of Western civilization. These weren't Western peoples or their ancestors, neither their cultures nor their stories. In retrospect, I told myself these civilizations belonged to the Arab world as part of my story. But there I was in an American high school being taught that this was an inseparable part of the Western story. One argument that attempted to justify the presence of this history within the Western civilization's narrative and subsequently within its educational textbooks and courses was to provide context and exhibit the progress to the eventual Western civilizations that would come into existence. And even if we accept this weak argument, providing such context shouldn't come at the inference and presentation that these rich and earlier Eastern civilizations belong to Western history, even if this necessity for context was true. Then how come at other points within Western history books, and specifically about Eastern peoples and cultures, when context was extremely requisite for the representation of non-Western historical narratives, such context was never provided? And this is what this video is all about how the West intentionally targets misrepresentation within its historical storytelling in the field of education, to both serve its own self-praising purpose and more unjustly to weave a tapestry of cynical illusions when it comes to the Arab world. Investigating the facts concerning how Western educational curricula, and more specifically its literature, present the Arab world to its students has seen many surveys and studies conducted over the last 2 decades. Such studies included the audit of various state-approved 21st century textbooks from both Europe and North America. The overall finding exhibited an archaic and yet to be reformed Western educational curriculum when it came to the representation of Arabs from the very beginnings, from antiquity, even before becoming Arabs, and all the way to modern history. Obviously, it wasn't only Arabs that saw their stories falsely misreported. East Asian, African, and even the Native American peoples and their cultures suffered the same dismissive portrayals of their existence and history. Now, it wasn't only the text of these historical publications that was analyzed by the studies, but in parallel, the imagery that accompanied the written words was also examined. How the aggregate compounded impact of these tools portrayed the Arabs, telling of a pessimistic version of the Arab condition and history, thereby conditioning the young students in creating their personal, narrow understanding of the Arabs along history that exists today. Generally, Arabs in Western textbooks were represented, whether inferred or clearly stated, as a savage, ultra-aggressive people who were backward and uncivilized, their faith Islam as a strange and foreign faith of violence and cruelty, an unruly people that had no loyalties and were severely underdeveloped. And this impression is what regulates how a large cross-section of Western society, young and old, view Arabs in light of modern-day events and socio-political affairs. To clearly outline the methods of misrepresentation that the Arab world struggles with in Western education, it's best to break down such a strategy into 3 main parts, and these would be a breakdown into cultural, socio-political, and religious influences. But unrealistic images of the deserts of the region were a common finding, as were inaccurate images of the region's people, who were often depicted as backwards farmers and nomadic Bedouins, dressed in indigenous clothing, riding camels to their desert homes. From a cultural standpoint, one of the main inaccurate impressions Western students are given of the Arab people is that they're an uncivilized population, depicted mainly as nomadic, tribal, and Bedouin. Practically never are they shown as urban dwellers, be it in antiquity or in early modern reference to the Arab world. Such an impression exudes a lower sense of urbanization and development, as well as a lack of permanence within any land. Only images of Arabs in various deserts are portrayed. And when identifying the Arabs as sedentary, then that is as farmers or laborers, not landowners who operate their own agricultural enterprises, but virtually as serfs within an archaic feudal social system. Here as well, the dominant imagery presented again reflects a simpler people in traditional attire, usually poor and decrepit. The other cultural component is what I referred to earlier, the theft of the Arab people's history, in categorizing such historic achievements of the region as Western, such as the inclusion of ancient Eastern civilizations, not as ones belonging to the Arab people, but as part of the anthology of a Western history narrative. So not only do Western textbooks deprive the Arabs of their history, but also claim the achievements of the Arab world, thereby diminishing such achievements' importance within the collective history of the world. In the second part, that's on the socio-political front, most Western educational narratives claimed that the benevolent West in the early to mid-19th century were the ones who helped the Arab world arrive at new levels of development and reform, where the introduction of institutions, trade, and industrialization by the colonial powers made the Arab world a better place. Before Europeans arrived in North Africa, the region had no national economies. When Europeans established colonies in North Africa, they made all the decisions. They wanted North Africans to export as much as they could to Europe. European companies turned the raw materials into finished products. The finished products were worth far more than the raw materials, so the Europeans made tremendous profits. Yet here again, this misrepresented the truth on the ground. Institutions, trade, and even the beginnings of industrialization had been effectively implemented many decades, if not centuries, in the region as part of the Ottoman Empire, another victim of Western misrepresentation. Arabs, although socially diverse in many ways, were not represented in such a way. We see only one version of ethnicity, religion, and class. No Christian is to be found, and no range of beliefs, be it of liberalism to centrism, is to be seen. Not even a middle class. It's either Arabs in minority are ultra-oil-rich, or in their majority, lowly Arabs on the verge of poverty. Whereas the facts show otherwise. Arabs from the northwest of Africa and all the way to the Arabian Peninsula have indeed a mixed and diverse ethnicity that includes many races and ancestry. A religious tolerance up until the early 20th century that was historically above and beyond any of the so-called enlightened nations. A full range of ethnic socio-political leanings that would mirror many diversities across both the developed and developing worlds. One consistent topic presented in the more recent histories of the Arab world within Western textbooks was the natural resource petroleum. The Arab world became synonymous with oil, and hence, in modern times, the importance of the Arab world in parallel rose to prominence due to this critical commodity. The mention of oil, though, was not to shed light on any new positive impression of Arabs, not by any means, but it was to reflect and condition the political importance of the Arab oil-producing nations to Western prosperity. The world depends upon the oil and gas resources found here. Because of this situation, many nations have more reasons than usual for watching closely the events in these oil-rich countries. Achieving peace in this region is of global importance. The Israeli-Arab conflict is a recurring theme and makes up a substantial part of the allocation the Arab world gets in Western textbooks. What is presented is an imbalanced and practically one-sided account of history, that favoring Israel, of course. That there really was no Palestine, nor a Palestinian people in early modern history. That the promised land and nationalistic aspirations were a right not to those who had actually lived there for centuries, but only for the Zionist Jews escaping European and hence Western ethnic cleansing. After World War II, the United Nations recommended dividing Palestine into Arab and Jewish states. This plan created conflict among the peoples there. Fighting broke out between Israel and surrounding Arab countries. The Israeli forces defeated the Arabs. Terrorism as a concept within Western texts was inferred as an invention by the Arab world. The historically savage peoples, as descendants of the assassins of Old World lore, were at the heart of this modern violence that was threatening Western ideologies, freedoms, and lives. Removed from the Western text was that, first of all, terrorism was indeed a Western colonial import, brought to the region by the French, the British Empire, and the Zionist zealots. An example of this is a UK textbook caption found within a political satirist cartoon. "We Arabs might be incapable of building a civilization, but by Allah, we can blow up everybody else's. And secondly, regarding terrorism, another fact that was omitted was that these acts of violence were indeed armed resistance against the same colonialist oppression that had characterized the region between the end of the 19th century and the middle of the 20th century. Also not mentioned was and is the reality that Arabs in general oppose any sort of terrorism. The quantity of Arab people who might condone terrorist acts are a few and far in between, yet again are inaccurately represented as the entire population. And this last point takes us to the final aspect of misrepresenting the Arab world, and that is the impression given to young Western students on religion. And the first illusion that the Western texts elicit is that only one faith existed or currently exists in the region. Now, references to the fact that Arabs, beyond being majority Muslim, are indeed minority Christian and Jewish, that there was a religious tolerance, as mentioned previously. What exists is a negative description of Islam as an archaic and violent religion, which denies women equal rights, promotes slavery and terrorism, and is responsible for the underdevelopment of Muslim populations. But the crux of the matter when dealing with religion in the Arab world is with a disingenuous characterization of Islam in total, as a violent and destructive religion, not only in the past, but yet remaining still, and explicitly highlighting Islam as primitive, unfair to women, and accepting of slavery. As an example of this is how women are portrayed within textbooks, with imagery as only wearing niqabs or veils. Islam's distinctions from Christianity and Judaism were overemphasized, with no mention of the similarities the three religions have in common. Western textbooks create a vast chasm between the Abrahamic faiths, almost as if they're not even comparable. They avoid informing students that more links Judaism and Christianity with Islam than separates them. The fact that Muslims believe in the same prophets and holy books, that the core sets of moralities and ethics are virtually mirrored. But what we get in return is an alienation of Islam, made out as the other faith that is far removed from its competitors, Christianity and Judaism. While Europeans were labeled as reformers, Muslims were categorized as jihadists and fanatical. And we see this further explained with the selective Muslim concepts chosen for explanation, such as jihad, and not the full breadth of what jihad could mean for any Muslim, but a targeted definition, the one of martyrdom, a martyrdom inflicting as much damage as possible to the West and their way of life. Yet jihad is way bigger than this sliver of a definition. For Muslims, it is a struggle in life, in pushing along throughout this worldly life and attempting to always follow the righteous path. Ultimately, the Arab world is positioned in all these textbooks within a Western backdrop and mindset, and hence no real understanding of the various elements of culture, sociopolitics, and religion can truly be assimilated in the correct way with such brief elaboration, even if done with integrity. It's clearly understood that a full history of the Arab world cannot exist in the textbooks of a Western education. In general and on average, Western textbooks dedicate just under 5% of their content to Arabs. So it's critical to note that one has to be very aware and calculating in what is written and what is not written, because then all the students' focus and understanding is put on the meager words and ingraining pictures that are positioned within these texts. And it's not about the quantity that is said about the Arab world, but about the necessary elements that can provide a correct, high-level understanding, while at the same time doing away with the lazy inaccuracies or targeted omissions of certain knowledge that can result in the intentional misinterpretation of what was indeed selectively revealed about the Arabs within the textbooks. The selection of repetitive thematic words, ideas, and imageries, as in the connotations of savagery, uncivility, backwardness, and wars, have led to the establishment of a significant yet incorrect conclusion about the Arab people, even if the text itself has been minimal, and even when appearing to be accurate, most likely only applicable to a very small percentage of the Arab populations, yet now is generalized onto all Arabs. Terrorism is one such word, ranking third in the number of times being mentioned within the Arab sections of Western history books. Third, following only the word Arab and Israel. Eastern civilizations, such as the various Mesopotamian, Phoenician, and ancient Egyptian civilizations, belong to the Arab world. They strictly belong to Arab history, and don't belong whatsoever in the historical, educational literature of Western civilization. The West should stick with their earliest civilizations, the Minoans, and then followed by the Greeks. The West, within their textbooks, should reform the perceptions and misrepresentations of the Arab people and cultures, that's for sure. But they should also be more accurate in relaying their own involvement in the modern history of Arabs, when they, for the last 2 centuries, were the colonialist powers who created all sorts of strife and suffering for the indigenous populations across the Arab world. That is exactly when context is crucially necessary, so that when Western students learn about the fully revealed and bare history of their own nations, they can then understand the present better. They can then view the present in a much more enlightened and informed manner, and avoid making ignorant and unjust judgments of the Arab world.